the tears in our eyes. How many of our people have to die before they take a little time and recognize they really matter? Tell me, what do you say when you look at me? My life matters. My know if I'm safe, walking on eggshells, hoping to see the end of the day. And we've been praying for change, but none has come our way. That's why we still have to say, my life matters. Okay, what do you see? Tell me, you look at me. My life matters.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. It's Thursday, and what a great way to start a program, particularly today. My life matters. The world is focused on the question of how much a life matters. Minneapolis is the epicenter of a global examination and introspection. What is it all about? And what do we do? What is our part in ensuring that every human being knows that her or his life matters? You know, I'm monitoring, like most people, the activities with the trial of Derek Chauvin going on right now in downtown Minneapolis. And I'm monitoring the sense of mixed feelings, some hopeful that justice will prevail. And what justice means, obviously, is personal. For some, it means one thing. For some, it means another. But there's a sense that justice may not prevail, and that our society will lapse into the shorthand of convenience and rationalization and attempt to sweep this incident under the rug again, to treat it as a one-off, something unfortunately that happened. But I believe and I know that this one is different. I call this the inflection point. It's a point in time that the world is watching and the world is changing. And it's changing because of the voice we just heard, the music of the Hamiltones, My Life Matters. So I'm pleased to have on this call today friends of mine, people that I know and respect and trust, and I love them actually because of their commitment to our shared opportunity to be the best human beings that we can be. And they bring that in their personal lives, they bring that in their family and also in their corporate and civic lives. This is part two of a conversation that I'm having with leaders of the organization, shorthand MBCRE, Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity. Formerly, it was the Twin Cities Corporate and Community Coalition. And it's an organization that's relatively new, convening corporate foundations and corporate giving programs and others to align the work of diversity and inclusion of government affairs and corporate philanthropy around ensuring equity, access, and diversity, ensuring values that have sustainability outcomes that are sustainable, that in fact change the fabric, the dynamic, the chemistry of what it means to be a people. Well, I'm pleased to have James Burrows, who is the Vice President and Chief of Equity and Inclusion at Children's Museum. Also pleased to have today Reba Dominski. Reba is Executive Vice President and Chief Social Responsibility Officer and President of U.S. Bank Foundation. And Lee Anderson is the Director of Global Issues Management and Public Affairs for General Mills. Thank you all for being here. Good to see you all again. And I want to start just by throwing out feelings, asking you to just react to the moment. This is not scripted. It's a conversation, and we've all agreed to be free and clear and to respond to questions as we are given to, and to bring our best ideas and thought and energy to this conversation. So start with you, Brother James, in this moment, as you continue the work both at your company and in this collaboration, and as you watch the trial, what's on your mind?
So thanks, Al, for having me. I appreciate it. Just want to correct one thing real quick. I'm at the Children's Minnesota Hospital, although I used to be on the board of the Children's Museum. I don't work there, so.
You know, I apologize. I said children's. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. No problem. We're good. But how do I feel? That's a great question. Let me just back into it this way. I went out of town this last weekend for Vegas for just some golf and relaxation. Got back Monday when the trial started. And for me, a trial starts when juries have been selected and you start opening statements. I used to be a trial lawyer for many moons, and also used to do criminal defense way back in the day too. So that's when the trial starts. So when I watched the opening statements, I saw a mentor of mine, Jerry Blackwell, who's mentored me since I've been a baby lawyer, give a clear and concise, direct, and talk about how the officer did not let up at all, and showed the video, which I'll be honest with you, Al, re-traumatized me again, watching it again, and then watching it again and again and again. So that was rough that first day. I watched the last couple of days too, periodically. I want to commend this brother. I think his name is Donald Williams, the young man that was at the bus stop. One, for his demeanor and just holding himself in the best way he could as he saw somebody murdered in front of him. And then two, I think this was nothing but God, having him have the MMA background, having him know about blood chokes, having him know about what he was seeing, and describe it in such great detail that although it was sad to me to hear and see, I'm glad he was there to talk about that, as with the paramedic, the young lady who's talked about, not checking the pulse. So I am hopeful, Al. This justice system, don't get me wrong, is still gives disparate treatment to Black and brown people. This justice system is not fixed. We got to do some more changes of policy and prosecutors and all that. But the fact that Keith Ellison and Jerry Blackwell, two friends and mentors of mine, are leading this case, and the fact that these witnesses are aligning, especially the young ladies, the 9-year-old and the 18-year-old who had to testify and see that happen, that I think the story is playing out and the jury will come back with a just verdict. But we still need to realize it should never have gotten to this. There should be no George Floyds, Philando Castiles, Jamar Clarks, Marcus Goldens in Minnesota. We have to stop that piece. So we won't even get to any trials. We'll get to just basically somebody being held accountable for their actions, both police and non-police, and moving away where nobody has to die. So a lot right there, Al, but I'm feeling hopeful after these last few days. But that first day was rough for me because I started to flash back on just being a brother from Detroit who grew up there and saw the police do things that they shouldn't do at certain times to people who look like me.
I talked to Keith Ellison before the trial began. He couldn't go into details, but one thing he did say that impressed me that I remember and I'm always sharing is, even as the prosecutor and as the state's kind of top attorney, he is committed to ensuring that the accused has the very best representation, and is hopeful that the accused team, his team, the accused men's teams, bring the very best arguments they can in search of and in hope for getting to the truth and to justice. So I think that's the right approach. That's the right way to approach this idea of openness and fairness and the potential of justice to prevail. So thank you for your opening comments. Reba, let me go to you. Reba, good to see you again. And you do so much. In disclosure, you and I are both board members of the Greater Twin Cities United Way, so I enjoy our relationship there. And your company is a customer of mine, Insight News. So I thank you, and I disclose that as well. So,
thank you, Al. I'll be brief because I think James said so much. I'll be honest. I'm just really fragile. I don't know any other word for it. I am an avid social media user, and I have been, I think they call it doom scrolling. I can't actually watch the trial. I started. I have lots of friends who are on text streams and are, direct quoting people who are on the stand. I'm hearing about these witnesses and then watching on Twitter their testimonies, these babies, uh, these witnesses who are being re-traumatized and who will be traumatized for the rest of their lives because of what they've seen. And for so many of them, there's a sense of powerlessness of I couldn't do anything. And I was talking to a woman at US Bank named Maxine Swain. She's on our diversity, equity, and inclusion team. She's a Black woman. And we were talking about kind of how she was doing, how I was doing. And she said, what strikes me is that we are women of action. And when something is wrong, we work really hard to make it right. And I think that's what's striking me is I feel this sense of kind of powerlessness as I watch it all unfold. But I think I'll come back to James' excellent point around hope and around this work that we do. I come back to the work of the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity. I've had conversations this week with Shan Smith-Jones, with Shantara Hardy, with Akua Ellis, who I have met through this group of leaders. And those conversations sustain me and convince me that we must do this work and we have to do it better than we ever have, with more intentionality than we ever have. It's just the fierce urgency of now, to borrow Dr. King's phrase. So I'm fragile. I'm trying to work my way through it. But honestly, Alice, I even thought about this conversation and being on with you. My anxiety was growing because there are times for the last couple of days that I've been this close to tears in conversations with senior executives at US Bank where it has nothing to do with the trial and something just hits me. And you just you feel it, the weight of the moment. But I think I will cling to what both you and James have brought to the table today, which is the sense of hope and justice that I hope and I believe will prevail.
Thank you, Lee Anderson. Good to see you again. And I truly value the leadership you've demonstrated for a long time in the area of equity and equality, particularly championing the rights of people in the GLBTQ plus communities. And so as you watch what's going on right now, what's on your mind, and how does all of this sort of converge or flow into the change that I believe you and I both expect to happen in community and within humanity? What do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Al. I appreciate you inviting us back and giving us this time, and especially on a momentous day like this. I'll touch on a couple of things that James and Reba hit. One is I am really struck by the moment, and it's impossible not to be, but like James, I too know Jerry Blackwell, and it's almost startling to see him on national news. I'm not surprised. Jenna Mills has worked with Blackwell for a long time. I've worked with Jerry and had the pleasure, I guess, if you could put it that way, of having him pretend to be opposing counsel in deposition prep. He is the man for this moment. And that's what I keep thinking when I see him on national news and in this coverage. And I'm proud of that, I guess, in that sense. So it's striking to me in that way. Like Reba, it continues to fuel my ardent belief in the necessariness of our work that we are doing and the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity. We talked last time, Al, about how this group is taking the long view. So we are not looking past this moment because it is here, it is now, it's in our community, and we have to recognize the urgency of it. But because of it, it fuels me to continue to double down and say, we need to make sure that this works. And as you said, Al, we cannot fail. We must succeed in bringing an inflection point that has been attempted before in the past. You and I have talked about that. And this has to be different. And watching the trial just reinforces that for me.
So James Burrows, what is the difference? Lay the case out again for this assembly in the name of Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity, and make the case for the statements I've read and heard you and your team make about the on the table focus on the Black community, on the historic marginalization and what's the right word? Ability to be dismissive in a way that's against and around Black people and Black interests. So talk about why this is different and why you're part of the leadership of this.
Sure. And I think it's different. It's going to have to be decided over the next several years. So I can tell you it's different now, but until our outcomes change and we get different results, then I'll tell you how it's been different. But why does it feel different? I'll tell you that. It feels different because the way it came about, I got to commend James Moman, who was the former Chief Diversity Officer at General Mills. Now he's Chief Equity Officer at 3M, who brought a group of us together who weren't necessarily all aligned. I know of Reba, I knew of Lee. I knew Reba personally, but I knew of Lee. But a lot of people I did know. He brought us together and said, we need to do something because of George Floyd's murder. As we came together, we realized that this wasn't just a select group of friends, like everybody telling everybody the same thing. And I'll be honest with you, in some of the groups over the last several years I've been in Minnesota, they come together just to hear each other say yes to each other and say, yeah, we feel good about it. We gave some money. Now we are feeling good about the Black community. It didn't feel like that at all. As it progressed, I'll be candid and honest, and Reba knows this because she had to get me back. I quit initially. I said, you know what? This don't really feel all that right that y'all going to do some stuff. I got work to do at Children's Hospital. I'm going to go there and I'll have time. Reba said, no, James, this is different. Come on back because we're going to do some different things. I talked to James Bowman as well, and I came back with the intent of saying we got to do some action. And we've had that, Al. We've had people come to the table. Our steering committee of 9, we have, as we said before, filter-free Fridays. We talk about things that are not necessarily comfortable, but we also, too, don't just leave it as an unresolved issue. I want to commend Lee on this call. I had a run-in, a good one, with Charlie Weaver on the Minnesota Business Partnership. And I called Lee one time. Lee was like, just tell him how you told me. Tell him how it is. And I was like, you're right. I got to tell him how it is because we don't have time anymore to make people feel good about stuff. Now, I don't want to be disrespectful. I never am with anybody. But I got to tell you my truth as a Black man, what I haven't seen in 30 years that we need to do differently. So that feels different, that communication, that level of uncomfortability. And the last thing, too, Al, is it's not about the shine of who's at the table. Sometimes these groups, as you know, in our communities, like, well, James has to be the lead of the table. He has to be the person in the newspaper. None of us 9 care anything about that. Matter of fact, when we did our op-ed piece, we all were like, well, do we have to put our names by it? Can we just say MBCRE collectively? Because we don't care about getting that shine. And that's different, too. We care about just the results and the work. And then the last piece is we're willing to bring in partners and partner together. I know you'll probably ask questions later about the alliance of the alliances with Greg Cunningham and Deshaun and others. When they initially came to us, we were like, well, a lot of the work they're talking about intersects and could be duplicative of the work we're doing. But we didn't say, you know what, we're not going to partner with you. We instead stepped back and said, hey, we're going to figure out in a session on the Saturday, I think Lee and Ken Charles did, and said, how does this work intersect? And then Reba, got in there and said, okay, on the philanthropy side, it's not about MBCRE money or alliance money. It's about a collective work. How do I go about and raise money for philanthropy in this space? That's different, Al. That doesn't happen in this town a lot. And I think for me, we're going to have to work through some things still. We're going to have to work through how we work together and what it looks like. But I think we're on a good path to that. So to me, that's how it's different. But at the end of the day, the outcomes have to be different for Black people in health, education, economic development, housing, and then we can say we're truly different.
So Reba described that approach. How did this ability to create collaboration with the newly Alliance for Alliances emerge? And what discussions went in there? James raised the flag. The question is, are we competing? and whose domain is this, whose territory, whose turf is this? And that strategy or approach is divisive by its very nature. And it seems like you all have come up with a way to step back and say, you know what, let's look expansively and broadly and figure out how we collaborate differently. Am I right in saying that? And if you would describe that, how that happened?
Yeah, well, it wasn't easy. You end up with a set of talking points, and you don't see the messiness of how you got to that set of talking points.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start with the work that the steering committee and that our co-chairs did in meeting with Greg Cunningham, Ken Charles, and a couple of others, just as our groups were kind of forming. And Lee and Ken really took the synthesis of that conversation and said, there is a way that we can work together. And when I think about collaboration versus competition, I'm always brought back to Senator Wellstone, and we all do better when we all do better. I mean, we all do better when we all do better. So we went in, I think both groups, eyes wide open of, if we can actually work together, we have the same set of outcomes. We want the same things. If we can work together, we can actually do better work together. So the first step was Lee and Ken, and I can let Lee talk more about that, creating kind of a summary and a vision for how we would work together. Where I came in was really thinking about the role of the philanthropy pillar in helping raise the necessary funds to lift up the work of the African American Leadership Forum, led by Marcus Owens. And I know you've had recent conversations with the Alliance and Marcus. And when we looked at what ALF was doing, one of the focuses of our philanthropy pillar is aligned funding to support the outcomes that we want to see, improving the lives of Black Minnesotans. We also, as James mentioned, have been kind of struggling with this listening component. Al, we recently had you come talk to our steering committee, and we called it a listening session, where we wanted to hear from your experience and your guidance and your wisdom about how do we make sure we don't fail? How do we do this right? Well, we need more forums for listening. So when we looked at what Marcus and Alf were doing with Black-centered design, which I think is very innovative, we saw an opportunity to align philanthropic funding for Alf to help lift up this work, which we think will help drive these outcomes that we share in common with the Alliance. So what I did was pull together our group of funders and said, listen, we could let Marcus and his team do what nonprofits in this town do, which is, go hat in hand, tin cup in hand, from corporation to corporation, asking for money. Our usual cycle is we say, yeah, we'll get back to you. We have to have a foundation board meeting. We have to have all these things. And in 6 months, we're able to say, yes, we'll make $100,000 commitment to you. But we saw an opportunity to say there are some things in this space, in this moment, that are more important that we could do better or differently. So we pulled together a group of funders, and essentially in about 3 to 4 weeks, we were able to raise a little over $3 million through MBCRE members to support the work of ALF and of the Alliance. So really kind of tactical way that we were able to show how this group can operate differently to get things moving in this town to drive improved outcomes. So that was the role that I played. And again, it sounds neater than it was. It's messy. We have a lot that we've learned from it. We have to figure out, how will this look going forward? But it all started with messy conversations with the Alliance and with Marcus to say, what could we do together? Because we all want the same thing.
Reba, I've been impressed by your ability to articulate the value of naming an initiative, naming it as one that is specifically addressing the question and the experience of Black Minnesotans. And I believe, James, correct me if I'm wrong, too often we feel there's been a reference to or a basis in general policy that reflects the numbers, the misery index in the Black community, but when the solution side of the equation shows up, there's been a willingness or an expectation that you don't focus on the numbers that brought you there. Let me see if I'm saying that properly. As often as not in the Black community, we have said that our demographics, our numbers, our poverty have been a cause for action resourcing, but our organizations and our intellectual capital is not engaged in a way that supports organic development of the same in our community, and that we are expected to say, you know what, yes, we're coming out of this history of pain and Black misery and discrimination and structural racism, but in the interest of being fair, we should not overstate our personal historical cultural reference, but rather operate under the umbrella of general multicultural diversity. And so there's a pushback, there's a debate in the Black community, and I think in the marketplace in general. And for that reason, I said, Reba, I was surprised and pleased when you were able to say, I think both through this initiative, but also on behalf of your work at the bank, that we are doing things looking at the Black community because it is the Black community. And that is our intent. And you'll be able to judge what we do because we're not just saying we're doing. So what do you think? I mean, I'm impressed with that. Discuss that with me, Reba.
Yeah, I mean, it is a point of differentiation for us. It was very intentional and it was not easy, Al, to get there. We had hours of conversation, I think, Lee and James on the steering committee about BIPOC versus Black. And we had filter-free Friday conversations where there was a group who said, this has to be focused on BIPOC, not just Black. But ultimately we pushed because language matters and intentionality and focus matters. And we said at this moment, the priority needs to be on Black Minnesotans. And again, back to Senator Wellstone and the quote, we all do better when we all do better. Mm-hmm. If Black Minnesotans do better, we will all do better. There are economic, there are social rationale and data behind that. So it was a very intentional decision. And it is one of the things that I think differentiates our group.
Lee, what do you see long-term? What's the vision? What's the goal? So you have these a couple of relationships that you've formed and are forming where you have discovered synchrony. What's the big picture, the big vision? Yeah. What'll happen in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
Yeah, the short answer is that is work yet to be done, right? Is to say, what are the clear outcomes that we want to measure ourselves against? We've got another 3-hour retreat to start to untangle some of those questions just coming up next week. You know, we continue to put a ton of time and effort into ensuring that we are listening to the community appropriately and developing those outcomes appropriately. But going back to the Alliance and the work of the African American Leadership Forum, we're really excited. One of the things we are really excited about that initiative is the ability for a Black-led, Black-centered design initiative to develop those outcomes and to create a common table where we, as the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity, can be one of the groups at that table to hear, listen, learn, and help understand what those outcomes are that they are developing, and to benchmark against them to say, how does this align with our work? How can we establish similar outcomes? How can we take that input and align work to it? I'm co-chairing the policy committee. I'm of the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity. I'm really interested in understanding the policy initiatives that the Alliance brings forward and teases out. So I see that partnership as really critical to centering our work and ensuring that, you know, as we always say, we are in this work with and for the Black community and Black Minnesotans. I really see the Alliance as a key lever to be able to achieve that. So you asked me this question right now. This is where a lot of our attention is because this initiative has been started up. I think it's another great sign of that alignment is that Marcus Owens has now joined the steering committee for the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity. And now we will have this direct connection. So we're getting regular updates from him on our steering committee. And then as he builds out the Alliance and that initiative, we will have regular touch points there as well. So I'm really focused on that right now, and I'm really excited about that opportunity as we continue to build out what those long-term outcomes are for the Business Coalition.
Are the outcomes more focused on wealth creation, civic engagement, education, addressing health disparities, or all of the above? How do you see yourself? Which modalities are the ones that you will prioritize for the channeling of resources and for policy work? I'm presuming that a lot of what you do will be raising questions at the policy level and encouraging modifications and changes in policy that enable communities to thrive and do better and be better. So what are the priorities in which of these areas? And maybe me listing them in that scenario is not the right way to look at it even, but you can respond to that.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about some of the policy priorities first. And then while I'm doing that, if Rayba or James has the list of the outcomes that we've identified, that would be great. So I'll turn that over to Rayba then next, because we have identified specific outcomes for which we still need to establish the measures. But in the policy front, we are in the middle of the state legislative session right now. The Minnesota legislature is on break. They're on their spring break right now. They'll come back next week. And our coalition has already weighed in and will continue to weigh in on some key topics. First is access to quality child care. We have heard this time and again about the disparity in the achievement gap in Minnesota between Black Minnesotans and white Minnesotans. We know that access to quality child care is a key component of addressing that. The business community has been aligned on that for a long time, but we haven't done enough, clearly. So the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity has joined with other advocates for additional funds for quality child care. We're really excited about the additional funds that will be coming out of the federal stimulus package, and we'll be watching very closely to ensure that those funds and any additional funds from the state legislature are addressed in a way that are meeting those needs for Black Minnesotans specifically. So early childhood education is one area that we've already weighed in on and continue to weigh in at the legislature. The second is housing. We've also heard really strong feedback from our listening sessions and from the community about the need to address housing. My co-chair of the policy pillars, Koa Ellis at the Greater Twin Cities United Way, she often cites that when they went out to their grantees that worked across many different areas of need, not just housing, and asked what is the top area of need, it came back clear and time again as housing. So we sent a letter to the legislature and are continuing to follow up to advocate for additional housing resources to be placed in the capital improvement spending package that the legislature typically passes every year. We expect there to be a capital improvement or bonding bill this year, and we're advocating for additional housing resources that can be addressed through there. And then next week, we'll also weigh in on two areas related to health. One is maternal health. There are a number of great proposals that would increase funding for maternal health, which is a critical area of need and where we've seen really strong disparities between Black Minnesotans and white Minnesotans. We met as a coalition with Representative Ruth Richardson, who is advancing a maternal child health proposal. We are supportive of that. That would increase funding for that and include or require anti-bias training by certain providers. So we're supportive of that. And then last, we are supportive of an initiative to increase access to free school meals. Not every student that is eligible for free school meals has access to it in Minnesota. And these are programs that the federal government actually provides full reimbursement for, and we have schools that aren't participating in those right now. We're supportive of a broad coalition that has come together to address that. Part of our impetus for that was we heard directly from Appetite for Change based in North Minneapolis, which is working on food issues and using food as a way to address disparities. And we heard directly about their lived experience and the importance of school meals in addressing food insecurity in their communities. So that's an additional initiative that we're working on this session. And so I'll stop there, and then maybe Reba can talk a little bit more about our broader outcomes as a coalition.
Sure. So Al, I'll just share with you kind of how we've stated our outcomes. So our overall objective is to create an inclusive, just, and prosperous state through intentional partnership with Black Minnesotans, along with changing public policy, workplace, and philanthropic practices towards the elimination of racial disparities. There are 6 specific outcomes, and they are long-term outcomes. When we put this together, and Akua Ellis led us through this exercise, there was the data that helped identify these priority areas, and then we have a 10-year outlook that we've put on this. So this is not about we're going to see the change in 6 months or a year, which many of us in corporate America want to see. It's a long-term outlook. The first is increasing housing stability and choice for Black Minnesotans. Lee talked a little bit about that on the policy side. Second, eliminating health disparities for Black Minnesotans. I would say James is a leader in the work that he does with children's in that space. Third, a strong start and launch into the workforce for Black Minnesotans. The fourth is increasing access to workplace opportunity and career growth for Black Minnesotans. The fifth is accelerated wealth creation among Black Minnesotans. I know you mentioned that specifically, Al. So wealth creation is a focus. And then finally, and importantly, policing practices that are just, transparent, and accountable to the public safety of Black Minnesotans. Those are the stated objectives and outcomes that we put in place in MBCRE.
James, I know you may have to leave a little earlier than the close of the program. I wanted to get your voice in and take advantage of the leadership role you played in state government in the last administration. And among the things that you focused on was this idea of getting Black people used to seeing ourselves and hearing our voice at the table of decision when it comes to legislation and creation of public policy. And you also were a fierce advocate for the expansion of the purchase of goods and services from Black organizations. It was shameful that I think when you began, an audit indicated that out of a $2-3 billion spend from the state of Minnesota and others, the state purchases from Black businesses was less than 200,000, and in fairly short order, that has jumped up to the $130 million a year mark on its way to a $300 million objective short term. And I think you were at the table and instrumental. So the question is, how do we ensure that the James Burrows, men and women of both knowledge and experience, are at the table and are setting the agenda so that, and I think like you, with a sense of duty and obligation, not only to our community, but to our state. If your voice isn't there, everybody loses. And so how do we do this and organize this process, this collaboration, in a way that the work itself insists on and nurtures involvement, engagement, the belief in our community that this is our work as well? What do you think, James Burrows?
So good question, Al. I think a couple things. So one is first, demand accountability of the James Burrows of the world. So when I got in that position, the community held me accountable. Meeting you 20-something years ago, meeting Brother Mahmoud El-Khati, Josie Johnson, my pastor Albert Galvin Jr., Bernadette Johnson, the school district, I knew that I had an obligation to fill for not only the Black community, but also Botal Uribe at CALS, my brother Carlos Mariani, and the Latino community, that I needed to be held accountable. And if I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do, somebody would say to me, hey, brother, you're not doing this for the community. So that's the first step. So whoever you put in these roles, make sure they're accountable to the community and to themselves. The second piece is demand a seat at the table with your own folding chair, as Shirley Chisholm says, and make sure that you're sitting at the table doing the work and that people are listening. There were several occasions, and I'll use the NAACP as an example, that when Philando Castile was murdered, and there was a lot of things going on in the city in 2016, the state, I invited the NAACP to the table. I said, Jason Soul, Leslie Redmond, Jeff Agee, Anika Bowie, y'all come and y'all gonna meet at the governor's office with the governor there, and I'm gonna be there with you. And I'm not gonna protect the governor. I'm gonna have him hear loud and clear why you're upset. What is the pain? What is the hurt? What is the BS you're not willing to take anymore? And when he heard all that, he was like, James, we need to do something different. Because for the first time in a long time, those voices were heard. So once again, what I try to do is, Al, not only bring myself to make change, put other voices at the table. I think soon after I got the job, I met with you and the other members of the People of Color Press as well. I met with a lot of vendors or contractors, Richard Copeland at the time at Thor. They got a $1 million+ contract as well. You have to use and leverage the system to make sure that that can happen. The other thing, too, I'll say is this, and I want to go back to the workplace pillar that I chair for MBCRE. Make sure you hold companies accountable. So I love the fact that we have 80 companies in MBCRE. At the end of the day, though, I want to ask at the end of probably the year coming up, okay, how has our C-suite changed from where it used to be as far as Black people in it? Are there more in there now? What's the pipeline for getting more of them in that?
C-suite meaning?
Yes, the executive suite. So okay. Chief executive officers, executive suite, those that report to the CEO. How has that changed with Black people?
And also boards of directors.
I was about to go there next. Have your boards changed? Has your supply diversity number changed? Although it's not a measure that Reba talked about, it is something we're going to ask companies about, and we're holding ourselves accountable. Real quick, we hired a marketing company, Leverett Weeks, that's run by Meredith Moore, who's an African-American woman who's the daughter of my frat brother and former law colleague Cornell Moore, doing our work. We needed a consultant. We hired the tremendous Shantara Hardy, Black woman doing great things. We can't be in a place where we're saying you should do these things and we don't do it ourselves. So we're being intentional around that. And I think for me, Al, to your question, that's what's going to help move it forward to the next level. And I'll say this, that in with Reba and Lee, you got to be able to do this too and expose yourself as a Black community and be honest and open about how you really feel. They've heard me say some things that I've never said in front of people who are not Black before, but I was like, you know what? In order for them to understand the nuance of the Alliance of the Alliances and the Boulay and James Burrows, how that comes off, I need to explain it in a way that they can hear it, and we can still get to the table and knock something out and have a good time about it, but they need to hear that. They need to hear a conversation I'd have with Greg Cunningham, typically in private, and not bring back to people who don't look like us. But I can bring it back in a way to say we can work together. So I think that's the other difference. I feel for the first time, myself and others letting that door open a little bit and trusting the people. Now, I will say this, and I love them to death because they're partners, but I'm going to ask that we also hold myself, but Itasca, Greater MSP, the Minnesota Business Partnership, and all of those organizations that in the past several years have tried to do better. We got to hold them even more accountable now. We got to say, you know what? It's because the anniversary is coming up, May 25th, and we did these two things, the MBCRE and the Alliance. It's a 10-year plan. What's the growth there? What are we going to do different? How are we going to permanently change the policing system that if a police officer does a charge, it never again goes back in front of a county prosecutor. It possibly goes to the AG's office for proper prosecution like we're having now in those tough decisions. So I appreciate the time. I do have to jump off to do another podcast myself, so I apologize, but thank you for the opportunity, and we look forward to working closely with you as well.
James, thank you so much. James Burrows is the Vice President and Chief of Equity and Inclusion at Children's Minnesota. I think I said that right this time. And James is a good guy. And so let's continue with Reba and having a hard time reading Lee, Reba and Lee. So the other side of the question, James and I talk as two Black guys about our internal a discussion and how much we feel comfortable sharing with you, not black guys, right? And talk about the need for us to be clear enough. Well, let's put the shoe on your foot. And how do you, and I'm going to presume, I'm going to say European Americans, white Americans, approach the same question? What goes through your mind? What experiences, both in personal life story or corporate work or civic work, uh, uh, either motivate or restrain you in any way in engaging around these critical issues? And I think we started off by saying this is different. So everybody is kind of taken off some of the restraints that we may have had for whatever reason. But talk about that for a minute. Reba, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I'll start with I am actually a proud Asian American. I'm Indian American. And I forgot to mention in my open, part of the reason that I think we're all so fragile right now is also the rise of hatred against Asian Americans, and seeing that at the same time as we're watching the video on the trial. And it is a lot. But I have to also say the amount of support that I think the Asian American community is getting from the Black community, especially, like specifically, my friend James posting Cal's resources for how to best support Asian communities. There's something so powerful about us all coming together and saying we can do better, we can do more. What James talked about in this, this trust we've created to be able to be yourself, and share your story is incredibly important. We all have so many labels put on us, but when you actually are able to say, yes, I am those labels, but I am so much more. I am my story, I am my history. I was raised by a single mom from Detroit. I grew up in Detroit. James and I share that in common. Until we open up and share our stories, we don't know the things that we have in common, and we don't understand each other's perspectives. One of my favorite things that James shared recently in an email, and I won't give you the whole context, but was about what double Dutch was. He put in an email, I feel like I'm double Dutching. And then he was like, for all the people who aren't Black, here's what that means, And there was this incredible moment of like, I love that. I love that, the language is real and the explanation is real. And I'll just share one more thing, which is my conversations with Shannon Smith-Jones from Hope Communities about philanthropy have been some of the most profound conversations I've ever had.
She's amazing. She really is.
She's amazing. And she always does this thing where she says, I'm sorry, I'm going to go off on a tangent. I'm sorry. And every time she says, I'm sorry, I like pick up my pen because I'm like, she's going to tell me something that I don't know. So we've been talking a lot about how philanthropy has actually increased inequities, how philanthropy can actually increase divides. And our focus and our pillar, which we co-chair, is how do we avoid that? How do we make sure philanthropy is actually a source for reconciliation and reckoning and closing divides? And Al, something that you said recently to our steering committee, and I've played out with Shannon, has been fascinating, which is institutional attention fades. We actually have to build equity into our institutions. James Burrows at some point will leave Children's. I will leave US Bank. Lee will leave General Mills. If we are the standard bearers of this work and we go, the institution's focus and investment may change. So this idea of how do we operationalize and institutionalize equity is something that I am learning from primarily the Black members of this group. And for me specifically, as someone who thinks I've been in philanthropy for a while, I think I'm pretty good at it, I am learning that I have so much to learn and I have so much to change in my institution to make sure that when I'm gone, the equitable outcomes continue. And I think that applies to all of the members of MBCRE. Part of what we have to do then is open up those dialogues and give people space. And actually, Lee, I've been talking a little bit to Shantara about our steering committee meetings and how packed they are. They are typical meetings. We are going through the checklist. We're saying, yes, we got this done, this is due on this date. What we need to do, which is what our offsite is going to be about in a couple of weeks, is create more space for dialogue so we can be our authentic selves, we can continue to trust each other, but we can learn together. And not only can we just listen, because we talked about this even now with what we heard from you, it's one thing to listen, it's quite another to say, I'm going to turn that listening into action. And that's what our group is all about. We want to listen for the purposes of doing something with what we're hearing. And ideally, if we do it right, we'll build it into the systems and the institutions and policies and practices. So this isn't about one group of people. It is about the institutions and the legacy that we can leave in those institutions if we operationalize this focus on equity. So I know there was a lot there, but
Oh,
it's
that's
been
great.
amazing
I heard,
experience.
I've heard the same thing. It's a strategic, it's a strategy. How do you hardwire, hard bake into the process these changes and this dynamic that will continue to grow as the organization grows? I heard that from people in the Obama administration who said that their intent in creating Obamacare was to make it expansive enough and intricate enough that it couldn't be dismantled with a single stroke of a pen. Their intent was to attempt to hardwire the elements and the benefits and the interests in ways that would make it extremely difficult to undo simply and certainly not with the stroke of a pen. And so that's a certain amount of intentionality. And that's what I hear you saying, that we have to be very intentional in how we embed new expectations and outcomes in the organism, in the institution, in the culture. Lee, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I'll just say a few things because I know we're coming to the top of the hour. I'm so grateful to James Moman because he created a process for this dialogue at General Mills that we still use and will continue to use, called Courageous Conversations. A process where we can, sit at a table with fellow employees and talk about these things we don't normally talk about. So I felt really prepared for a lot of the conversations that we're having in the Business Coalition for Racial Equity because of that format and that tool. It was not a surprise for me to hear people share their lived experience that was very different than mine, and to learn about that and to take those learnings, as Ray said, and put it into action, to create an allyship journey plan for myself, and to be very considerate and thoughtful about how my actions are impacting others and how I'm showing up as an ally for Black Minnesotans, for Asian Americans, for lots of different communities, for the trans community in particular. These are things that I've learned a lot about through that process. So I take that experience and I think about our coalition. Ray hit the nail on the head. As a steering team, we're having our own courageous conversations. We call them Filter Free Friday. But we're learning about each other, and we're learning about these different lived experiences is really making a difference in how we work. And I think ultimately will make a huge difference in what we accomplish. That is the best way to be able to do it is by learning from each other.
So, Ray, but does it surprise you that I didn't know that you were Indian? Number one. And
no.
when you just said that, I said, oh, aha.
No,
I get
it doesn't.
Because I hadn't classified you.
I
and
get
so,
it. I get it all the time. I actually have people, and we all know this, you have said to me, what are you? And I usually start with, well, I'm human.
That's right.
Because of the way that I look, I have light skin, I dye my hair light brown. I don't, and that's just to cover up the gray.
Only your hairdresser knows for sure.
But I absolutely, it doesn't surprise me at all. And I've actually had people say to me when I say I'm Asian American, they'll say, no, you're Indian. And I have to explain, actually, India is part of Asia. All of these things are ways to open up dialogues. My first name is Revathi. My middle name is Nedikarienda. My last name before I got married was Uthapa. I fell in love with a Polish boy, got Dominski as a last name. So I am very confusing to many, many people.
And just, I figured, well, maybe she's Greek. Because Greek people are really hip. They're really cool. In my experience, I assigned you to somewhere in my experience that explained what I view and value as forward thinking and fierceness. And that's how I see you, as a person that is fierce, forward thinking, action oriented, and really is a person that's not afraid. And so I had to figure out how does she show up and what's my frame of reference for that? And so I said, well, maybe she's Greek or something. That's how the Greek people are, So
do you know what's
anyway.
funny, Aldo? I did grow up in Detroit, and James and I have talked about this, and all of my best friends, or my family's best friends, were all Black. And on my own personal journey, my own, diversity journey, it's been fascinating to explore. For me, I never quite belonged anywhere. I wasn't Asian enough. I wasn't Indian enough. I wasn't Black. So I was kind of in this nowhere land. But what it allowed me to do is absorb all of these elements of these different peoples and cultures. And I think it's one of the reasons I care so deeply about these issues of diversity and equity, is because I've seen it through kind of multiple lenses. And as Lee mentioned, today is Transgender Day of Visibility. And I think, as we've talked about for Black Americans, for Asian Americans, for our trans population, the importance of being seen must be mentioned.
Well, I think this has been a wonderful conversation. I want to thank you, Lee Anderson. Thank you, Reba Dominski, and thank our friend James Burrows and all of the people who are at the table with you in creating and executing a new vision, a new collaboration, the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity. Thanks for the work. You are welcome to come back here anytime. I'll be reaching out to you individually and as a group, because I think this conversation is so important. My objective is, how do we inject into the atmosphere new narratives, give ourselves and community vocabularies that allow us to write different stories, different results. And these will be results that reflect that we win, that we can win. And the important thing about that is to also maybe redefine what winning is. That winning may not be that someone has to lose. How is winning a communal value and experience that is reflected in shared, expansive, universal benefit? So that's my thought. That's my take. Listen, guys, thank you so much.
Thank you, Al. Thanks for your leadership.
We'll talk to you again. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I'm Al McFarlane. Join me again every day at 1 o'clock for important conversations. And if you're watching on Facebook, like it and share it. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. We want to grow this. And if you've got particular skills in the area of building social media engagement, I want to talk to you personally. Send me an email or give me a call, and I'm going to enlist your help in growing this conversation. I'm Al McFarlane, and we'll see you next time.
your mind.